This is homework 17. We're still solving quadratic equations. Now in question 11, I see I've got a trinomial on the left side here equaling some number. So the first thing I'm going to do is set this equal to 0 by adding 20 to both sides. So I'm going to add 20 to both sides. So I'll get x squared plus 12x. Now 36 plus 20 is plus 56. That's equal to 0. Now the first thing I might try is factoring. So if I hope it's going to factor, but I don't know until I try it. So I'll get x and x. Now, how do you get that 56? I could use 56 and 1, cut in half and double. I'll get 28 and 2, 14 and 4, 7 and 8. And I think that's all the ways I can get 56. Now, what I'm looking for is some pair over here because I have a leading coefficient of 1. I'm just looking for a pair that when I add or subtract, I can get 12. Well, I don't see that. This is going to be, if I add, I get 15. If I subtract, I get a 1. Okay, I don't see any over here. So this is not going to factor. All right, I can't factor it. It's not factorable using integers. So I'm going to have to try something else. Now I can try completing the square or quadratic formula. Let's try completing the square. I'm going to complete the square. So to complete the square, first thing I'm going to do is get that 56 to the right side. I want the variables on one side. I'll leave a space and the constant on the other side. Now I'll subtract 56, so I get negative 56. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take half of this coefficient, square it, and add it to both sides. So here's what I'm going to get. I'm going to get x plus, now take half of this. Now, if I do that, what am I doing here? Let's just check this. How do I square this out? I square the first, there's the x squared. I multiply the two together, I double it, there's the 12x, but then I square the last. So if I square the last, I'm really getting a 36 over here. So I'm going to add that 36 to the right side. So I'm really adding 36 to both sides. So negative 56 plus 36. Now that puts us here. X plus 6 squared equals, now this is going to be negative 20. Let's square root each side, so I'll get the square root of x plus 6 squared equals the square root of negative 20. Now let's go up here to the top. On the left side, I'll get the absolute value of x plus 6 equals, now square root of negative 20. I can see a square root of a negative, so I get the I. 20, I can break down into 5 and 4. So I'm going to get I and 4 times 5. That'll be the absolute value of x plus 6 equals, now, square root of 4 is 2, so I get 2I square root of 5. Remove the absolute values. This is where we get plus or minus, so I'll get x plus 6 equals plus or minus 2I square root of 5. We're almost there. Subtract 6, I'll get x equals negative 6 plus or minus 2I square root of 5. There is my solution. Question 12 says to fill in the blanks, this one and this one, so that the left side is a perfect square trinomial. That is, complete the square. All right, so to complete the square, let's work with this one over here. To complete the square, what you're going to do is you take half of this coefficient and then square it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take half of the 1/4, and then I'm going to square that. Now half of 1/4, just multiply the denominators. So half of any fraction is just double the denominator. So I get 1/8 squared, which is 1 over 64. So that's what I'm going to put into here. All right, that makes this side a perfect square. So what I do is I just take half this coefficient, just double the denominator, and then square it. Okay, I get an 8. So 1 over 8 squared, I get 1 over 64. Now, what have we got over here? On this one over here, x plus what? Okay, well, here's what this thing is. This part right here is going to be x plus that 1/8. All right, just take half of this coefficient. So that's that 1/8 squared. And sure enough, if you square this, you're going to end up with this right here. All right, so what did I do? I take half of this and square it. That gives me the third term. So what goes in here? X plus, and then half of that coefficient. Question 13, we are going to fill in these blanks, right? Fill in this blank and this blank. This is completing the square. Now, to complete the square, we know what to do. You take half of this. So to take half of a fraction, you just double the denominator. So I take half of 6/7. That turns out to be 6 over 14. But that'll reduce, right? 2 will divide into each. So if I divide each, 6 divided by 2 is 3. 14 divided by 2 is 7. All right, so 3/7. But then what I do, all right, now that 3/7, that's what's going to go right here. So right over here, I'm going to write, well, I've already got the x. So I'm going to write x plus 3/7. Now, to determine what goes here, I just take the 3/7 and I square it. So to complete the square, you take half of this coefficient and square it. So I'm going to take that 3/7 and I'm going to square it, and that'll give me 3 squared over 7 squared. How about 9 over 49? And that's what I'm going to put up here on the left. So I'm going to come up here, put that 9 over 49 right there. 9 over 49. Question 14 says to solve this quadratic equation by completing the square. Now, to complete the square, the first thing I'm going to do is ensure I have a 1 out here. All right, I've got a 1. And then I'm going to get this constant to the other side. Variables on one side, constant on the other. So how about if we subtract 13? So I'll get y squared plus 4y, I like to leave a space, equals negative 13. Now, take half of this coefficient and square it. All right, so I'm going to get y squared plus 4y. Now take half of that. Now half of 4, here's what I'm doing. Half of 4 is 2, but then I square the 2, getting a 4, and that's what I put up here, plus 4. But if I add 4 to the left side, I have to add that to the right side. All right, so here's where we are. Y squared plus 4y plus 4 equals, now negative 13 plus 4 is a negative 9. And this side over here, we have created this. It's the square of a binomial. What goes in here? The y, and then exactly half that coefficient. So get y plus 2. That's equal to negative 9. Now, I'll do it up at the top here. We're at y plus 2 squared equals negative 9. Let's take square roots. So I will get the square root of y plus 2 squared equals the square root of negative 9. Now on the left side, the square root of a square is the absolute value, y plus 2, equals, I got a square root of a negative, so the I is coming out, square root of 9 is 3. So how about 3i? And now when I remove those absolute values, this is where I get plus or minus. I get y plus 2 equals plus or minus 3i. And we're almost there. I just have to subtract 2 to get the y. So y is equal to negative 2 plus or minus 3i. Question 15, we're going to solve this quadratic equation, again, using the method of completing the square. So I'm going to do two things. First, I will ensure that I've got a 1 out here. Now there's a 1 already. But I want the constant on the other side. Variables on one side, constant on the other. So let's add 15, right? So we will add that 15. So we'll get y squared plus 4y, leave a blank, equals 15. Now, let's complete the square. So what do? Same thing every time. Take half of this, square it, add it to both sides. So I'll take half of this and square it. I'll put it here, I'll put it here. So what I'm going to do is this. I'll say 1/2 of 4, okay, that's equal to 2. Now I'm going to square that. So I'll get 2 squared is 4. All right, so I'm going to put that 4 here and here because I'm adding it to both sides. So things will now look like this. Y squared plus 4y plus 4, that's equal to, now 15 plus 4 is 19. This side over here, we have created a perfect square trinomial. It factors like this. something squared, and that something is x, and then exactly half of that coefficient. Half of that coefficient. Half of plus 4 is plus 2. That's equal to 19. All right, I'll do it up at the top here. I'll get quantity x plus 2 squared equals 19. Now, I've got a square equaling a number. Just take square roots of both sides. Square root of x plus 2 squared equals square root of 19. On the left side, the square root of a square is the absolute value of x plus 2. That's the square root of 19, and that 19, that's a prime number. I can't break that down anymore, so I think we're just going to have to work with the square root of 19. But let's remove the absolute value. So I'll get x plus 2 equals, now this is where you get plus or minus. I get plus or minus square root of 19. One more step. Let's subtract that 2, so we'll get x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 19. And that finishes off questions 11 through 15 here in homework set 17.